for us to dive into in the unfiltered fashion. And so, yeah, looking to throw it over to Chebs. How you doing today, Chebs?
Oh, Wes, I'm doing very well. How are you doing? It's great to have a good weekend with a lot of sunshine. And our clocks have gone forward. So, it was an unusual morning, as it usually is when the clocks go backwards or forward. So, just getting into all of that vibes. It's been a really sunny, nice day. And then now we're getting some snow. So, very Nova Scotian. So yeah, I'm just kind of taking all these things in and being present in the moment.
Very important, very important to be mindful and present in the moment. I also took my time getting up this morning and yeah, just enjoying the weekend. Got to spend some time with some friends and time with loved ones, and happy to gather here with you, our viewers, and our special guest today here on another episode of Unfiltered. Really want to encourage our viewers to click share, get the word out more, and start a watch party, and yeah, get more people involved in this discussion as either audience or participants. So before we dive into the meat of today's conversation, Chebs was wondering if you were feeling any vibes out there in the community.
Yeah, Wes, I like that you're encouraging our viewers to participate more. We really, our vision, like you said, is we want to create an engaging 1 hour that we spend together, so we even want them to be able to get the links and join the conversation and contribute their opinions or thoughts, at the very end. If we're doing an interview or a chat with a certain guest, we want to create room for our viewers to be able to contribute and participate in the conversation, because that's the way we get all of our thoughts represented, and that's the way we each learn from each other. So we want to make sure that people understand that that's the value of this platform and the show. So in a moment, I'll be sharing some connections in the comment section. Share, join, start the watch party. And as the conversation unfolds, if you have a question, put it in the comment section. If you want to join the conversation live, you can do that, and we can make the link available for you to join in. So that is how you participate in the show. Now, talking about community things, there's been a lot that has gone on this week, but we'll just capture some of the most news worthy, or the things that were so much in the news. Of course, everybody must have heard of the Prince Harry and Meghan Markle story and all of what came out of that. And, to me, it's so funny because at the end of the day, I laugh and say, hey, who thought the monarchy wasn't racist in the first place? So why is there some debate about whether there was racism or no racism? The monarchy has been racist from time immemorial. So, so the question really is
Yeah, exactly.
whether they are being less racist, or whether they've been moving down from that racism pedal. It's not whether there even is racism. Wes, I'm interested about your thoughts
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, it has given kind of a moment of resurgent, interest in the royal family, and people kind of expressing their views either for or against. The interview with Oprah Winfrey was substantive enough and reached enough people and has stirred up enough of this conversation that Justin Trudeau himself had to say in a press conference that the Canadian government is not considering separating from the royal family and as a part of our constitutional monarchy. So it has created quite a stir. And that's very interesting. And I think that, like you said, this kind of a conversation about the racist nature of the royal family is really only continuing this conversation, which is also reaching kind of a resurgent point around what racism is, what it looks like, and how people are supposed to account for that in their own actions and the actions of others to keep each other accountable in pursuit of a non-racist society. So yeah, definitely lots of debates happening. I watched portions of the interview. I really thought that Meghan Markle was driving it the most out of everybody. And yeah, just like we believe in strongly here in Unfiltered, if there's a conversation to be had, let's have it, put it out there in the open, and see what people are saying about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with you 100%. And the other funny part about the whole conversation, it's great because we then get to have this conversation. And the other part about it was I saw something interesting, and it was a woman who had made this meme, or was it a post that said, you know, Piers Morgan had the, you know, when a conversation was being had that he felt the pressure and didn't feel like he could have the conversation, he walked out, you know. But other people don't have that opportunity to walk out. A lot of people who deal with these things don't have that, you know, way to like, okay, it's not going the way, I can just walk out. No, it's real. So that was another thing that I saw during the week that, you know, was very interesting to me. And I found that a very effective, um, you know, a very effective post, because it really put the spotlight on this issue of, you know, sometimes you can have conversations and you're willingly engaged and you can willingly disengage. But for other people, even though it might be just a conversation, because of what is at stake, sometimes it's hard to just think that they can engage and disengage. Once they engage, it has to go to a certain length because what's at stake impacts the very nature of their being. So we just have to be sensitive to these things, and so that we can all be good humans to each other, even when we have heated conversations where we disagree.
And also not be subject to disrespectful circumstances, interactions as part of someone's job. So I definitely see what you're saying, this ability to willfully kind of determine what conversations you're involved in day to day is something that differs from people in power, and those are the people that are not in power. And so that relates directly to what we're going to be talking about today with about the subject of bad bosses.
Absolutely. I can't wait for that conversation. And we have Lisa Cameron in the house. She's waiting to come in. I'm sure it's going to be a very spirited conversation. So I can't wait to come in and contribute my thoughts. So I think those were the most consequential things, Wes. I mean, the only other one was, and I'll just say this because there's some Canadian reference that I thought about, is that the US eventually passed the $1.9 trillion you know, COVID-19 relief package, or whatever it is that they call it. And it's supposed to do all these things. It's a historical bill by all means and measures for the US. But when I was looking at all the conversations around it, one thing that I kept thinking about was that Canada already did this. Why is everybody, you know? So we already did something like that. We were ahead of the curve. We did something that took care of everybody and various segments of society, and put things in place that cater to businesses, try to protect and give everybody some means to survive this pandemic. And I thought it was funny that the US did theirs at the tail end when we've already had the vaccine. And, you know, so it just, to me, was like a reflection of democracy and how it's not, you know, it's not as linear and universal in the sense as we perceive it. You know, we can agree to what it is, but it's always a lot of play for it to produce outcomes.
Yeah, and I mean, democracy is another one of those terms that can be understood in many different ways, and can be seen. This is what democracy looks like in many different ways out there in the world, and so the mechanisms of Congress are definitely one of those visible aspects of the democratic system that governs the society in the United States. And there's lots of unnecessary kind of bottlenecks and shortcomings within that system. And so, it's important once again to learn from this COVID-19 stress test how imperfect these systems are and how they have to improve in order to really provide justice and support to those most in need in our society.
Mm, mm. Well, my friend, you take it away. I know our guest is waiting.
Yeah, and so today's guest is a tireless labor advocate at the forefront of critical movements such as the fight for $15 an hour as a minimum wage. Also, our guest is involved in such progressive organizations as the Workers' Action Center, Equity Watch, and the Public Service Alliance of Canada to advance critical movements that these organizations stand for. And the subject for today's discussion emerges from an article that our guest Lisa Cameron wrote in August 2019 in The Coast about the subject of bad bosses, and discussed how throughout their kind of diverse work experience in different sectors, Lisa was noticing that there's this common trend of employers abusing employees and those employees remaining powerless. And this drove her to write an article that was then picked up by the Halifax Examiner, Nova Scotia Advocate, Rank and File. And now Lisa is here to talk with us about this problem of bad bosses. So welcome, Lisa. Thanks so much for making time for this discussion today. And just wanted to check in with how you're doing today. And yeah, tell us a bit of your personal story.
I'm good today. Yeah, you kind of covered it. I guess I can say that at a point I'd had several bad bosses, and I faced things from gender discrimination to sexual harassment at work, wrongful dismissal, unpaid wages, bullying by bosses, health and safety violations. I've been misclassified as an independent contractor. I've done under the table work. I've been hired through a temp agency, short-term contracts. So I have dealt with a lot of bad bosses, and sometimes it sort of begs the question, like, do I just dwell on these things longer, or have I been unlucky? But regardless, rather than villainizing each individual boss, although I think that has value, I did sort of realize that there was, yeah, like you said, something fundamentally wrong with the way that we structure employment, that there was this asymmetry of power, and that the employment relationship necessarily favors the employer, not the worker.
Yeah, and you said that kind of you might dwell on these things a bit more than the regular person, but I think that really that's just a matter of critical consciousness that developed throughout these many different experiences you were talking about, that you just kind of saw the inequity and lack of fair and decent respect for workers lied openly in these experiences that you were talking about. So let's dig into some of those stories a little bit more. Tell us about maybe a specific experience that really made you think that things are unfair and unjust.
I mean, like I've had a lot of experiences like that. I think the worst one was I worked for a company in Kingston, Ontario. This was a TESOL company that's teaching English as a second language. They offer the LSAT course, or other courses, and I had come out of like a series of low wage paying jobs, working in customer service facing positions, dealing with sexual harassment and things like that. When I got to this office job, and this was my first office job, there was an in-house HR department. There were sort of signs all over about occupational health and safety hazards and things like that. So it did appear to me that the boss was going to take my employment rights and the rights of my coworkers very seriously. What I found as my employment continued there was that there was rampant gender discrimination. Women were paid significantly less than men. It was stipulated in our contracts that we were not to discuss our wages, which is one way that employers can kind of get away with this kind of thing. But as we, started talking about our wages, and we learned that we were being paid far less than our male counterparts. Men were threatened for taking parental leave. At one point, it was said to one of them, "Men don't need time off for babies." Women were offered at one point ice cream bars in lieu of pay raises. So it's just pretty blatant gender discrimination. Ultimately, I needed time off for surgery. So I needed 2 weeks off. This was unpaid. And my employer, over time, just demanded excessive amounts of medical documentation. And each medical note that was requested of me was supposed to go into increasing detail about my medical situation. And it got to the point where I felt like I was focused more on their needs than on my own needs. Even still, when I think back on such a vulnerable time, I remember kind of focusing more on these administrative obstacles than on my own personal health. And when I returned to work, I think it seemed as though they were retaliating against me for even having taken that medical absence. And I was bullied, gaslit. My bathroom use was brought up a lot. I had 4 male managers confronting me about my bathroom use, asking me questions like what it was that I was doing in the bathroom. For the record, I think my bathroom use was consistent with what is normal, but it just
That's atrocious.
I was accused of drug use. I was scolded for using too many Post-it notes. I mean, it just got out of control, and that was I think that was the straw that broke. I'd had other bad bosses, but that was the straw that broke the camel's back, I think.
Wow, yeah, that does seem to be an especially atrocious example of not being treated properly and it creating a toxic work environment. And so, yeah, let's talk about that point of radicalization in which you finally said you've had enough and you wanted to do something about it. What motivated you to write the article in August 2019? Or in what ways did you take up the fight against bad bosses?
Well, I think like so many, it started with sort of just basically understanding my rights, doing some investigations. I was looking into legal remedies and then talking to my coworkers about their rights and our rights. Um, and then, yeah, like I said, I mean, at a point, it just clearly there was something wrong with employment. And I got involved with the Fight for 15 and Fairness campaign, which is putting pressure on provincial governments to increase the basic employment standards. From there, when I moved to Halifax, I remained involved with the Fight for 15 and Fairness, but instead of being in Kingston, I was now in Halifax working with that group, the Halifax Workers Action Center. Yeah, so that's sort of how I got started.
That's great. And then, and what did you think the reception would be for your article when you wrote it in the Coast?
I was surprised by the headline. I thought it was just sort of a basic article about, I think, what sort of motivated me to get involved in some common issues. The headline felt pretty badass, but yeah, it was, yeah, I think it was well received, and that sort of led to a number of articles that I've written, interviewing workers about their workplace concerns, talking about some sort of legal issues with employment standards as they are. And so I've worked for several publications talking about work.
Yeah, and so maybe this would be a good time. Where can viewers find some of your work so they can read more of it?
Um, I Everything that I've done, I think, has been posted through the Halifax Workers Action Center on their Facebook page. But Rank and File is a great publication, and so you could go to their website. Any of the social media accounts for Rank and File, the Nova Scotia Advocate. I only wrote for the Coast, I think, just that once.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into the core concept here, bad bosses. Can you help myself and also our viewers understand exactly what you mean by a bad boss?
Yeah, and just to sort of segue into that, I actually think that bad bosses is probably, although there's so many things that are interesting about employment and there's so much to talk about, I really like the subject of bad bosses because people may not identify with broad labor goals or understand the intricacies or shortcomings with their employment rights, but almost everyone has had what they would call a bad boss. So we can get into what that means, but I think it's just such a great starting point. Bad boss stories can be sad and depressing, of course, but there's also, I think, sometimes an opportunity for humor. People can laugh at their bad bosses, and I think these conversations can really connect people. And in sharing these stories, we also learn that our suffering is not unique to us, that actually we have a lot in common as workers, and our bad bosses have a lot in common as well. But as far as what is a bad boss, I'll start by saying today's employment landscape is so fragmented. And so I think to ask ourselves the question, what is a bad boss? We actually have to start by asking ourselves, what is a boss? So is a boss like the major insurance company that you work for example? Like if you work at Manulife, is Manulife the boss? Or is it the CEO of that company? Is it the temp agency who hired you, who's legally speaking the employer, but really is just like a kind of glorified payroll service? Is it your manager who supervises your department? Is it your supervisor who supervises your day-to-day work? And I think more recently, we're going to have to ask ourselves the question, is it you? If you're classified as an independent contractor, the boss is basically making the argument that you are your own employer. And in many cases, that's not true. But I would say that anybody who exercises control over your labor is in some way a boss. And as far as a bad boss, I think it's subjective. I think there's a range. A bad boss could be someone who's disorganized and frustrating, someone who drags meetings on too long, someone who doesn't know or respect your employment rights. And then I think you can get, more serious. Well, not to say that those things aren't serious, but I think then it can become verbally abusive, physically abusive. And when you think about employment in a broad global sense, there's really no end to how vulnerable a worker can be or how abusive a boss could be.
Yeah, tragically true. I've just heard a little bit of echo there. Just so
Yeah.
the tech department is aware of that. And so yeah, tragically true that there are so many ways that a boss that has control over your labor and your day-to-day work can be bad. And I think that there is a kind of everyone can generally agree that we become suspicious of people that don't hold themselves to the same standards that they hold those under their control to. Someone who's disorganized, and in many ways seems to be working against the core goals of the organization that the employees go to work to help, advance every day. And then, yeah, there are those more blatant forms of abuse that you mentioned, which are also, tragically frequent. And but then thinking about some of the more underlying forms of that a boss can really let the employees down. I mean, is a bad boss more than just someone who is unlikable in work, or is there some sort of other characteristic that where it really leads to a negative impact on employees?
I think where you draw that line again is so subjective. I mean, and I was really thinking about that question. What I can say is, if someone thinks, if you think that your boss is bad, I will agree with you, and I will stand with you. But yeah, I mean, where that line is, I think it really does depend. Being an unlikable person can make you difficult to work for or under, and that can, yeah, I think that's one way of being a bad boss.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it is highly subjective, and there's so many examples of it. I was wondering, Chebs, have you ever had a bad boss?
Oh yeah, I have, and it's so interesting because when we were talking about this topic and thinking about it, I was thinking about some of the bad bosses that I've had, and the most outrageous of it would have been when I did construction out in Calgary, and I worked on some of the constructions of these skyscrapers in the downtown core, and I don't know if, in terms of bad bosses, maybe this is just the culture, but when you're in construction and you're the general laborer, there is certain language that is used. Like we were called dog fuckers, for that was the way we were referenced. It was like a thing, you came to accept it. And you knew you were the lowest rung of people that were in that yard, for any given thing. And so it wasn't just it wasn't just the name, it went beyond the name. And some of the language, I just don't want to say it on here, but
That bad,
the
eh?
way we were treated was was pretty much, you were the lowest on the totem pole, and dog fuckers just sort of encapsulates that. And then that translates into sort of every other thing else that happened on site, right? So that would be my most vivid memory of sort of a bad boss, somebody who was there on site with you and always doing or saying things that were cringe-worthy.
Yeah, and I'm kind of wondering, I'd be interested in Lisa's opinion on this. Like, there is something specific about the sector, the type of work he's doing. Mark said he's doing construction work. Maybe low level, kind of simple grunt work that's not very respected, although it does require lots of energy and skill to do it well. And so, I mean, are certain kind of sectors more predisposed to having bad bosses and kind of tyrannical leaders that are overseeing your working conditions?
Yeah, and I almost wonder if a worker's vulnerability is sort of what would make some sectors, or like the workers that they employ, their vulnerability would make some sectors more prone to that kind of abuse. I mean, you think about like migrant workers, and Canada has many of them, but it's sort of the degree to which a migrant worker is vulnerable is really something that I don't think we don't even know very well, because there's not really a fair complaints process for workers who don't have status in Canada. So yeah, I definitely think that there are some sectors where workers are more vulnerable. Workers that primarily employ women, care workers, construction workers, absolutely.
Yeah, and you make a good point about the agricultural sector and migrant workers that are heavily relied upon in Canada, and how the travel restrictions really showed that there wasn't a plan for them to continue to safely come and do their work that's relied upon in Canada to keep the food system running, and how even when there was a plan for them to arrive, the infrastructure and housing that they had available to them arguably left them vulnerable to COVID infection with lack of public health supports that only compounded the really toxic and problematic working conditions that migrant laborers are usually subject to, just being sent home and not being rehired, rather than having any kind of recourse against maltreatment or improper treatment in the workplace. So that's, migrant labor, that so many problems with that. So definitely an example where bad bosses probably rule with impunity. I would kind of maybe challenge the conception of bad boss and say, is there such thing as a good boss, Lisa?
Yeah. I guess my opinion is that a traditional boss-worker relationship can never be truly fair. I think that the arrangement overtly favors the employer. However, I think like everything, some people are nicer than others. Some people get along better than others. So I do think that certainly employment relationships can be pleasant and respectful. And that in that sense that like a good boss-worker relationship is possible, but the thing is that it's not guaranteed. And I think that's the problem. I mean, I can be pretty doom and gloom about employers, but I can say I did have a good boss. Shout out to Janet at What'll I Wear in Kingston, Ontario. This is a vintage clothing store. And Janet is an example, a really good example of a small business owner who maybe didn't have all the resources at her disposal, but who did play by the rules. I think she understood my rights and she respected them. She treated me with a lot of respect and kindness, and we're still friends today. So I think you can have a nice boss.
That's great. Yeah. Go ahead, Chebs.
Yeah. You mentioned something that's quite interesting, and I think we could explore a little bit of that, or it is up for exploration, is this, it seems like there is a tension between being a good person and being a good boss, or vice versa. Like, do if you're a good person, do those values necessarily need to translate into being a good manager, or an employer or an overseer? Because how do you reconcile those two things? Your personality of being who you are versus your personality of being in charge and needing to do certain things and always make certain decisions to ensure that what you're in charge of runs the way it's expected to run. So where does somebody distinct you from being a bad boss or a good boss versus your just natural personality? Because I've certainly had people who say X and X is great out of work, right? Like when you're out with the workers and having beers and doing what, but they're like, oh, terrible, in the office or something like that. So
yeah, I think that touches directly on something that Lisa was saying earlier, where it's like something about the employment relationship is just inherently divided. And so you could have a friend, a good friend, outside of work, that then in the workplace, they are your superior, and that you are just systematically pitted against each other. If there is not a proper workplace and supports for you to do your work effectively, the employee is going to be taking a lot of that pressure to reach a certain level of productivity in whatever sector we're talking about. We could definitely think that this is driven towards some sort of profit. Profit for the overall organization is what's motivating, the sense of productivity. And if you're, as friendly as they may be, if your employer is not providing you with the supports that are necessary for you to do your work, but are more so imposing on you to work harder at any cost, your own personal cost, or anything like that. I have a friend who has an employer who prides himself on saying pressure creates diamonds. So I'm going to pressure all of you and work you really hard, but we're going to get through this. And this is where the sleight of hand kind of happens. And we're all going to get out of this better for it. We're all going to work hard. We're all going to feel good about our hard work. But who does that hard work weigh on more? The employee that is not given the proper support. So like Lisa was saying, there's certain kind of rules and values that an employer can adhere to help that relationship be a healthier one. But Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think like I agree. It's just the innate imbalance makes it difficult. What I'll say is like a good person, a good boss would be a nice person. But that's not conclusive. That's not all that's required to be a good boss. I mean, you certainly need that support. I think one of the most important things is a boss who considers work from the worker's perspective, who's able to open up conversations, to listen to the workers. And I mean, we know that workers know their work best. And so it actually is in the employer's advantage to really open up those channels of communication. But yeah, I don't think that being nice is adequate in and of like alone, but it is important.
Yeah, because I've definitely had bosses that are super nice, but once again, didn't provide me with the supports necessary to do my work. So there was a constant struggle in that regard. They might not have done some of their responsibilities to create an organized workplace, and so there would be tensions that would constantly arise, or confusion that would constantly arise that would weigh disproportionately on the employees, even though those things that aren't being taken care of are the manager's responsibility. So yeah, being nice is kind of besides the point. And when we're talking about what should be expected from an employer, I mean, nice, you would hope that people could just be generally courteous and humane to other people. But yeah, there is something about the structure of a workplace that is just slanted against the worker and enables people to kind of abuse and mistreat people to a certain degree, just because of the legitimacy of the employer-employee relationship. So those things should definitely be called into question. And yeah, I like what you said about opening up discussion to learn from workers about what's working and not working. And I think that it is rarer for someone in an employer or boss position to listen and really take in that information that's gathered through those in-depth conversations and use it going forward. Because once again, an employer or boss could be nice and open up conversations, but then do nothing with it. And that's really only an example of how a boss can be strategically nice but still be letting employees down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if anybody else had any directions they're interested in going, but I kind of wanted to talk more about the impact of bad bosses that it has on employees.
Yeah, I think a boss, when you think about it, exercises so much control over your life, like your ability to pay rent, your ability to afford food, your ability to, I don't know, like care for your children. I mean, a boss really does impact so much. Your perceived work performance, your image in the eyes of a boss can impact how you see yourself as a person. Like, am I valuable? Am I effective? Am I efficient? Am I intelligent? Am I worthy? Yeah, I think there's so much insecurity there, and I do think that even if you have a quote unquote good boss, that insecurity remains. That a boss could be a good person, you may have a good relationship, but say they have a bad day and they just decide to fire you, they're able to do that, and that renders you so vulnerable. Or it just sort of exposes your vulnerability, and I think that vulnerability is consistent with workers almost everywhere, non-unionized workers, I should say. I had I guess what I was going to say, like when I was younger and new to employment, I used to get so angry, and I still am angry, like don't get me wrong, but when I was younger, I spent so much time focused, especially with that one boss that I was talking about, on getting justice, like fighting back, exploring legal remedies, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't even stop to think about my mental health. I wasn't sleeping, but it was almost like I just didn't see it as like a mental health issue. I saw it more as just like, I have to get this done. I have to get justice. Going into work every day and not knowing what would happen or what my boss would do. And the truth is that although I was angry, it was also that I was hurting a lot. And I had a call recently with a worker in Toronto, and I won't go into too much detail about her specific situation, but I can say that this was the most severe case of employer abuse that I have ever heard firsthand. Like I can talk to people about their employment rights or kind of help diagnose a complaint, like is this occupational health and safety, or is this labor standards, or is this a human rights issue? But there were parts of this story that I was like, this is just straight up criminal, I'm sure of it. And yeah, everything she said was shocking, but what really disturbed me was that, so she and her partner worked for the same boss, and they were so terrorized that even though she said they lived in the same one-bedroom apartment in Toronto, she said they didn't speak to each other for a month. And my heart just like broke. And although I have never experienced anything near what she did, and she and her partner did, it made me think like that the impact that bosses have on our mental health is just, it's so serious. And like, I don't know, it made me so sad. So I think this has kind of changed my attitude when I'm talking to workers now. Yes, we can talk about remedies. Yes, we can talk about legal avenues. Like I can do an interview, I can publish something about it, but I'm starting to include in the conversation, just or started off by just asking, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Like, how is your sleep? Are you sleeping? Like, and just sort of humanize this instead of legalizing it. Let's like humanize it and
Yeah,
relate to one another.
go ahead, Chips.
Yes, I just want to read a couple of comments that are in the comment section because they enrich what you're saying. And we have a comment. So our initial comment is from Leah Thibault. And Leah was maybe making a comment about an earlier conversation that we had, which might feed into this, but I'll just read it. It said the royal family will not say they are racist because it will make them look too much like a human and they did something wrong, and putting them on the same, sorry, I just gotta go. Well, probably putting them at the same standard, put them at the same level as each and every one of us who feel, we're human. So that was a comment. But we also had a comment from Uzo commenting on what you were saying, Lisa, that said, I'd say being a good boss boils down to the maturity and common sense. Questions might be how to get the best and the most out of your workers and not necessarily trying to prove or show one is in charge. Being nice shouldn't get in the way shouldn't get in the way at all if this is the utmost consideration. So that is what Uzo was saying. And Uzo did also say that you were right, Lisa, that bosses can impact so much on how a person's life unfolds. There's also a comment from Sugi Jane that says some workplaces have double standards, which is not fair to most of the workers in general. So those are some of the comments coming in. So pick at it.
Yeah, I think that Lisa was what she was clearly saying is that the impacts of a bad boss go far much further than just the workplace itself, and that really speaks to the magnitude of the issue of unjust worker relationships. And let's be honest, the majority of society are workers rather than employers. And so there are so many stories that, this is an especially active time in the comment section, I think, because so many of our viewers also have these stories about these unfair situations they've had to face as part of their job. Lisa,
Yeah.
You were talking about humanizing the situation, and that's kind of a recent realization that you came to in terms of how to really help workers on a person-to-person level. Could you tell us more about how your activism and fight to improve the workplace has evolved over time?
Yeah, I mean, again, like going from just seeing it as like what my rights were, and like I think I was also pretty naive, assuming that when I started work that my rights would be adequate, that my rights would be respected, and that if they weren't, that the avenues to justice would be accessible to me. And everything that I just said, I have encountered the opposite. Not always the opposite, but the opposite does exist, and it's very pervasive. That there are so many obstacles in all of those areas. One thing that just sort of humanize it that I'm really working on, and I'm kind of thinking of ways that I can do this, is to connect workers cross sector and encourage conversation. So like, one of my favorite parts about work is that feeling when the boss leaves the room and everyone just like sighs a sigh of relief and rolls their eyes and like laughs. And it's like that building that camaraderie, I think, is so nice. But the thing is like, if you're just looking at your workplace suffering as like you and your coworkers, you're missing a huge part of it. It's like, no, this isn't just you. It's not just you and your coworkers, and it's not just your boss, that there is a fundamental problem. And so, however, I think that employer issues are designed to make you feel isolated, like to feel like, oh, if I only worked harder, this wouldn't happen. If I only, gave up more of my time or more of myself, this wouldn't be happening to me. If I was smarter, this wouldn't happen to me, or whatever. But I think it's like helping workers realize that this is not their fault. And I take a lot of inspiration from the Me Too movement. So while sexual assault and worker issues are not the same, I mean, unless you're being sexually assaulted at work, and there's a crossover. But if, like, although those issues are separate, it's still kind of a similar thing where I think the Me Too movement allowed people to realize that their suffering was common, that it was not unique to them, and that there was some sort of systemic issue. So I want workers who have faced abuse to have that opportunity to make those kinds of realizations, that they're, for example, not the only worker to be fired without cause or warning. they're not the only worker to like have their wages withheld from them. They're not the only worker who's been intimidated out of pursuing justice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, my hope is that workers get the chance to realize these collective issues, and then hopefully realize that that the solution is also collective.
Yeah, I think that's so wise because yeah, the goal is to first trigger that broader realization that this is not a specific problem with employees and their individual shortcomings, but something that makes you feel that way, you know, as some sort of crude motivational tactic to make you work harder and be more productive. So yeah, definitely that kind of cultural work that you're talking about is definitely, I think, where a lot of the work is necessary, and that's great. And then once workers come to that broad realization and become radicalized, much like yourself, Lisa, you know, there are kind of a certain amount of options, some radical and some not so radical, for what workers can do in their workplace to fight bad bosses. And, strike is a historic one, you know, going on strike. And I was wondering, with your recent experience, Chubbs, what are your thoughts on striking? And then Lisa, what other provisions do workers have to kind of fix their workplaces?
Sure. I want to say two things. One is about the issue of Lisa. I'll just pose this so I don't forget. Is what is the flip side? How do you deal with a situation where your boss is your very good friend? So also trying to strike the balance of not creating a workplace that seems to have double standards. And this goes to a question that has been posed in the comment section, making sure that you strike the right balance between your friendship, and this is your relationship to your boss, but also making sure that other workers don't feel like they are being left out or being discriminated against. So I'll leave you to answer that when you come back. But in terms of strike, I think labor actions are very effective. And I think that there's no other way for the common collective of workers to express a common viewpoint except we create the mechanisms for it. And so in that sense, I think, yes, there could be all the rudimentary stuff or the legalese things about labor relations that people get bogged down in. But at a very basic level, it is absolutely appropriate for people who work for a certain entity or enterprise to be able to come together and advocate for a common belief or position that they have. And it is absolutely appropriate that this be allowed because we inherently allow the relationship between employer and employees. And so we want to make sure that there's communication between the two. There's no need creating this sort of contractual environment or way of existing and then not creating or facilitating the possibilities for the two sides to communicate effectively and in a way that can advance the general good for both sides, the employers and the employee themselves. So I know I was part of a strike action recently, and for us, something that in the work that I do, we didn't think it would ever come down to that. But that should just tell you that nobody is somewhat above labor relations. It affects everybody, no matter what level you operate, government or private entity, and we all have to take it seriously and educate ourselves about it.
Yeah, so what do you think about strike, Lisa?
I mean, I think strikes are so important in so many ways to the individual workers who are participating in them, to sort of creating as a mechanism to social change. I think strikes have been enormously important. I think, though, when we talk about a strike, that right is reserved to a very select group of people. I mean, people who are non-unionized don't have that right. Now we're seeing in COVID, the right to strike is dependent on whether or not you're classified as an essential worker. And so workers who are arguably not essential in that sense are being denied the right to strike. So the right to strike comes out of a lot of other, like, workers don't just strike, they organize. This is a long process, sometimes years to unionize their workplace and to win that right. But absolutely, I think the power of collective action is important. And when workers withhold their labor, it becomes so clear, not just to the employer, but to the workers, which I think is so empowering, that like their labor has a lot of value, and their withholding it can have a huge impact.
Yeah, yeah. And workers got to believe in themselves more, and we should encourage each other to really realize the power that we have, but don't use. So that's some other really important work you're doing, Lisa. We were wondering if you'd be up for taking a question from the audience. We have Ebenezer joining us.
Absolutely. Hi.
Ebenezer's mic is still off, so you have to connect your audio, sir. There should be a pop-up that asks you to connect with either the computer audio or use another audio. You just have to click which one, and that would engage your audio. While Ebenezer connects, we can continue chatting.
Yeah, so Mark was recently on strike. And so, yeah, I was trying to pull from some of his experiences on the picket line. And, you work in a sector, Mark, that I think that people don't usually think being a bad boss, having a bad boss is a problem. Because you're, as a public prosecutor, are thought of as kind of, someone's doing pretty well. But even people in privileged positions in the early parts of their career have to deal with bad bosses, unfortunately.
Right, and in that case, our boss is the government. So even though we're an independent agency, independent from the government, so in that sense, we, like you said, it was just unusual because that's not something that people ordinarily expect. But we found ourselves there. We did what was necessary, and at the end, it just proves why labor relations are designed in that way and why those mechanisms are put in place. Because yes, we did do a 3-day strike action, and as a result of the strike action, the negotiations on the table were advanced and we actually got to an agreement, right? So every little bit and piece is not just there, to sort of build a fancy structure. They are there for a reason, and no matter how frequently they are used, you can't just discount them, because when it comes time for it to be used to advance its purpose, it's going to be used. And we did that effectively. So, my first time being at the center of labor relations, participating in it, and seeing it yield an outcome that was acceptable to both parties.
Yeah, well, Workers United will never be defeated. Ebenezer, what are your thoughts?
Greetings, everybody. I am very happy to come about. I'm happy to meet you guys. I'm happy to meet my friend, my childhood friend, Chef Mafalen Joe. I'm very happy to meet you people. Yeah, I think the topic we are discussing on is very important. Some of us who happen to be leading institutions, I think can say something about this. My name is Ebenezer Kegwa. I'm director of NGO, Foundation for Inclusive Education. Yes, leadership at work, for one to be able to manage office, manage resources, manage personnel, and so on, it takes a lot. It has to do with leadership skills. You have to possess those leadership skills. Leadership skills most often read and understood in theories, but sometimes practically in office, with the dynamics of things, you see yourself wanting, sometimes don't seem to understand how things are happening. And you see, sometimes you want to make work flexible for members of staff in the office or volunteers in the office. But more often than not, they tend to abuse that flexibility. They want to take advantage of whatever thing you do, whatever thing you say, where you want to make work lax. And so sometimes it pushes us, the directors, to become harder. I mean, it's strain our relationship with the rest of the staff and so on, just because you want things to move accordingly. Yeah, sometimes you really have to be high. You have to be, follow the principles. We have ethics rules. We have principles that have been put in place for each and everyone to observe to be sure that work goes on well. But most often, it is these workers, the volunteers, are the ones that tend not to respect it. And as a leader, you sometimes you want to let go because you want everybody to feel good. You want everybody to feel okay, and you don't want to impose. But at a certain point in time, you are left with no choice than to impose so that work goes on well. So the relationship at times goes the ability, the ability, the knowledge to be able to manage circumstances like that. Go to improvise. You have to do your own personal research. You have to, do things to make sure that your work goes on well and you achieve the results. So I'm
Yeah.
very happy to be part of this panel today.
Yeah, I think you make some great points, Ebenezer, the importance of balance, and how a leader of an organization, an NGO, such as the one that you lead, has certain demands and has to work through a certain amount of workload to be successful. And like you said, it's important to have those open conversations where you're talking to the employees and volunteers about what they need to do the work in a productive fashion. So yeah, there's some really interesting thoughts, Ebenezer. Lisa, did you have anything on that?
Well, I mean, I guess, yeah, I think that keeping those channels open, those channels of communication, like I said, hearing both sides. I mean, maybe this is a bit of a departure, but something that always kind of makes me laugh is that one of the main reasons that people use against unionizing is that somehow this will take away an employee's ability to discuss issues with the employer, or that it will take away your ability to negotiate the terms and conditions of your employment unilaterally with your boss, as if this even happens. And I mean, the truth is that what happens with unionizing is that it creates a democratic process through which you can negotiate the terms and conditions of your employment directly with your boss as a legal equal. I mean, it's not a popular opinion, but some might say that actually unionizing has some advantages to bosses as well, kind of streamlining that communication and giving workers a chance to really share their views without risk. Can actually, employers have a lot to learn from their workers. I think unionizing can kind of simplify that in a way.
Definitely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to point out that, and Ebenezer is heading an NGO that is doing very important work. And we're looking to partner to support some of the work that he's doing down on the ground. And so, so I'm very excited for that. And we will be talking about that here on the show. In a future episode, we would be exploring and talking to Ebenezer about some of the work he does and what we're partnering to work on. So I'm just encouraging our viewers to keep watch for that episode. It's going to be coming very soon. But yeah, so horrible bosses. Come on, let's not make this all Rose. Let's say the real deal. We have had, how many of you have ever just walked out because you were like, I'm done with this boss, this is it, I'm done. I certainly have.
Not enough of us.
Just said, I quit, this is it. And I did this at a time in Alberta where, I used to live in Alberta, and at the time, a lot of places had those signs out, we're looking for people. So it was like, if your boss was being so bad, and you look out across the street and there was a sign that they were looking for somebody, you just said, sorry, sir, I quit. And you walked right across the road and you were back at it again.
Yeah, it's a good feeling when I have done that a few times. Yeah, it feels great.
Yeah, and usually when I become alienated from an organization is when I've lost faith in the project itself. I just don't think that it's headed somewhere that I can really identify with or believe in, and that is the one of the main roles of the boss, to maintain morale and have everybody on the same page, working productively, in good faith and in a good mood, ideally, towards the goals of the organization. So yeah, sometimes it has been a person that has really made me feel uncomfortable in a workplace. But like Lisa said, you can usually kind of find a coping mechanism or mutual aid or forms of support from your coworkers who are also working under that employer. So I've usually been able to get along with that. I had the privilege of working in a unionized shop at Carleton University, as a teaching assistant, and there was definitely a number of problematic supervisors and authority figures that I had to work with as a teaching assistant in specific courses. But because it was unionized, there was this framework set up so that I was assured to have a respectful relationship, or provisions if the relationship wasn't respectful. So yeah, we all have our own experiences to draw from. We're at the top of the hour, and I had kind of two closing questions for Lisa. The first one being, what's your message to employees out there working under bad bosses?
I think there are, I mean, just a word of advice as someone who has had a number of bad bosses. I mean, I didn't even get into some of them. And I think, yeah, I think I have learned a lot through those experiences. One, just sort of unrelated but important, keep copies of everything. Seriously, you do not know when you're going to need those. If you do decide to pursue any kind of legal avenue, it's so important that you have record of things. And if something isn't communicated in an email, but something was said over the phone, send an email after you receive a phone call and say, hi, bad boss. This is to confirm that on this date at this time, we had a conversation where this was said. So that if anything escalates, it's just super important. Contracts, if you sign a contract, you might think that something is just a form and that it's just it's not an official contract. It doesn't matter. Take a photo of it, keep it. Can't emphasize that enough. And I think if you can, and if you have, I mean, I know that there are so many structural advantages that some people have over others. And unfortunately, it means that the legal avenues, like the human rights tribunals, the labor standard, or the labor board, they're seeing oftentimes complaints from people who have some sort of structural advantage in a sense. They have the ability to actually get that far. A lot of workers are intimidated out of even beginning to approach that process. If you can, file complaints, because that way it would make it harder, I think, for the system to keep hiding from you and your problems. If you have a workplace concern, go to the media. This is one way. It's generally a lot quicker, cheaper, and it hits the boss where it hurts faster than any kind of legal process. And definitely learn your rights. There are resources available, not enough, but there are. Learn your rights and talk to your coworkers about your rights, and then also consider the inadequacies of your rights. That's something I love, is that doing know your rights workshops, going to high schools and teaching people about their rights. What's so rewarding is watching people realize, oh, well, okay, I do have that right. I do have this protection, but wait a second, my boss can get away with this. And that's so important too. So definitely talk to people about these issues. Of course, talk to your coworkers about what you'd like to see change. Unionizing is an awesome way of winning great improvements. And then join the fight for 15 and fairness. That's not a pitch, but it's just there are people out there who are putting pressure on governments to make these kinds of changes that we would all benefit from. So get involved.
Get involved. Yeah, that's all such great advice. And then my final question for today's great conversation is, what's your message to bad bosses out there in the world?
I don't know if I can say it.
Go ahead. It's unfiltered.
It's unfiltered. Oh, go fuck yourself. No, well, yes, but I don't know. I mean, listen to your workers. Listen to your workers. Talk to people. I mean, I think that it's hard. It's hard to even imagine what I could say at this point. It does seem like it's just so out of control. But your company will do better. Your profits will be higher if this is all you care about, if you treat your workers well. But unhappy environments mean low productivity. When your employees are stressed out and they can't sleep at night, this isn't going to help you. So it really is in your interest, even if all you care about is profits, to think about what your employees need. So I guess that's what I would say to bad bosses.
Yes. Yes. To me, I don't think I can never advise a boss to quit for whatever reason.
Right. Got to have that fair deal.
You know, I believe, I believe quitting is not an option. And if you quit, you're not solving a problem. So I believe in negotiation. I believe in reconciliation. I believe in re-strategizing and trying to find a way forward. Take, for example, if you're a vision beggar like myself, who that runs an NGO, I'm a leader of the NGO. Imagine if I quit today. It simply means that the organization is going to cost thousands of people that I support are going to go, I'm not going to receive support anymore. And so the best way you can do as a leader is to find a way forward, push that vision, take it to higher heights. I believe it's a mission from God. And so you need to take it. And you also have to understand that it will never be easy. It's not going to be a bed of roses. Challenges will always come. And what makes you a good leader is how you're able to withstand challenges. And not how you are very easy to say I resign or I want to quit. You say that you're not a leader. And so you need to stand your grounds, acknowledge faults, reconcile, and then find a way forward and carry the vision ahead. Even in government, if you're a leader in the government, you have a vision. So you need to do everything to stay there and carry the vision till your mandate expires. Then you can leave it for some other person to continue. And you still stay there as an advisor to make sure that the vision goes to where it's originally planned to reach. I think this is a very interesting topic, but I'd advise you never quit.
Well, it's important for workers to make their own tough decisions when faced with tough circumstances, but it's true that there's, so much out there that can be done in terms of transforming our world into a better one. And this conversation has definitely advanced my understanding of how that can be done. And yeah, bad bosses should definitely know that, there's more to running an organization successfully than just making people work hard. And for all this talk about working hard, bad bosses should definitely take on the ambition of having these richer conversations about how their organizations can work even better when they provide a fair deal to their employees. Lisa, thanks so much for so concisely and critically pointing out what needs to be done to fix workplaces in the modern world. I'm sure that all of our viewers enjoyed it. Once again, I think that was an especially active session in the comment section. Wouldn't you say so, Chips?
Yeah, it was really a great conversation, and we had some very spirited people making comments, and they continue to do so. So that is what we encourage on this platform. Is we're trying to have conversations about all kinds of topics and have people engaged in those conversations and also contributing or doing what Ebenezer did, which was saying, I want to come up and talk about this. And we made the link available for him to come out and give his views. That's, we're all trying to facilitate an environment where we can have these conversations and also learn. Lisa, thank you. I was, I learned quite a lot from just how we engage and also maybe how to, many of us are not bosses per se, but you have roles of responsibility and people that work under you in executing that role. So the same thing applies. You must not necessarily be a boss, but perhaps just a leader or somebody who has a group that you're overseeing for some purpose. So it was very good conversation with a lot of knowledge transfer.
It was so good to be here, and it was really nice to have such an open conversation about this. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Come back again.
Yeah, I would love to. This is fun.
Have a panel conversation on how to fix workplaces.
I'd love that.
Yes.
It's a catchy, bad bosses, I swear, it gets people excited. Everyone loves a good bad boss story, and that's what kind of makes it a fun topic. So
it's true.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. We'll see you again.
Yeah, nice. It was nice. It was nice joining you guys.
Thanks, Ebenezer.
Okay,
next time, as Injo have said, I am going to talk a little bit about the program that we run here in Cameroon. And if he permits me, like he's saying, we are looking out to a partnership where we can put hands together to be able to scale up support here in the Southwest. Southwest region of Cameroon, where there is chaos, where there's armed conflict. So I'll be pleased if he schedules a meeting for me to do a really presentation. I think that'll be okay.
That's definitely happening. Don't worry, we'll be in touch to make that happen.
All right, great. Another great episode, Chefs.
Okay.
Sign off. I'll see you guys later. All the best.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Later.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. Bye.